We're going to go over a dynamic style warm-up. Metabolic fitness, strength exercises, such as the ones we talked about already. Foam rolling, which we talked about already a little bit too for those that were here early. And then nutritional recovery for post-workout. Okay, so talked about this already. We are all athletes. We're all working in 3D. So fixed machines aren't that applicable to, say if I've got a basketball player. How many leg extension machines do you see out on the basketball court? Not very many. Again, that's an athlete that's moving through 3 planes of motion. They're jumping and squatting and moving side to side. So I wouldn't have them sitting on a machine. And we walk and talk and move and sit and stand in 3 dimensions. So again, we don't want to just train on machines. Machines are okay, but not as our primary exercises. So, and the reason I say that is, I've worked in fitness for over 10 years, and I've had a lot of clients that when they started with me, all they did was a little circuit on machines. And that's, don't get me wrong, that's way better than nothing. But this is kind of about taking it to that next level. Let's talk more about getting our bodies to function better. A golf tee example, that's actually an example of a client of mine who was an older gentleman who loved to golf. And so his sole purpose for coming to me was just to be able to feel halfway decent while he was out there golfing. So the golf tee example was one of his exercises was we would just have him stand and bend at the knees a little bit and just reach down as far as he could and then stand back up. Now that doesn't sound too exciting, but what we got him to be able to do was not have his buddies tee his golf ball up for him. So that's functional strength, right? He actually was able to apply a very simple exercise that we did, which incorporated flexibility and strength because we went through that full range of motion. And then he was able to tee up after a few sessions. So, again, I want to get stronger in my legs so I can bend over and put my tee in the ground, so I'm going to go to the leg extension machine. No, functional strength. Does that make sense to everybody, what I'm talking about? Okay. So there's another end of the spectrum, and I love this picture. And, for those of you that have worked out in fitness centers, you've probably seen as crazy things as this are close. I know I get sick to my stomach with some of the things I see. So there's an extreme to sport-specific training and application. So DeLoss, would you like to answer this for us? Do you think that is sport-specific training?
Depends what type of sport.
That's a good
ball with the weight, I guess. So.
Right, that's a good point. I mean, so that's really unsafe, first of all, and that's really extreme, and that's 225 pounds on his back. So that's the ball could pop. I mean, there's a lot of reasons not to do that. My point is that think about what, exactly like the law said, think about what you're going to do. What is your sport being applied to? So let me give you an example. I'm going to put this bow suit on the ground here. And anybody that wants to try this certainly can, but you don't have to, no pressure. You see me okay, Shira? So this is an example of a really neat sport-specific exercise. And I'm going to have you all see if you can figure out what sport it's for. So I'm on my stomach, and I'm doing this motion, and then I'm going to do an explosive movement up onto the ball and bounce on it. Anybody got a guess?
Surfing.
Surfing, exactly. So, I see a lot of folks doing squats on a Bosu and all that kind of stuff, and that's great. But, I see folks do inverted squats on the Bosu like this, and these are great. But are you a professional skier or surfer? I don't know, maybe you are, and those are good exercises if you are. But if you're not, first of all, let's work on just getting balance on the ground. I've seen that happen time and time again where folks go to these extreme like wobble boards and Bosu balls or something like this, and they can't balance here first. So, functional strength again, functional balance. If you're in a sport like football or basketball, tennis, or just walking around on the regular ground, let's work on balance here first before here. There's a lot of other cool stuff we're going to do this. I'm not trying to shoot this down, but I'm just trying to show you how we apply. So we'll leave that there for now. So basically what we decided was unless there is a sport where you stand on a Swiss ball and do squats, then that's not really applicable. So, stretching. I'm sure you all have heard of stretching. And stretching is important, but there's some really interesting research that's come out in the last few years about static stretching before you work out. And now we're talking about performance. I would much rather you do static stretching. I want to make this clear. I would much rather you do static stretching before you work out than not stretch at all. So don't get me wrong. Static stretch before you work out is better than nothing. But dynamic stretching, dynamic warm-ups before you work out is better. And the reasons why: it decreases force production, static stretching does. Let me show you the difference real quick. This is a static stretch. I'm putting my arm on the wall. Y'all may have seen this one before. It's level with my shoulder. I'm turning my body. Great stretch for the upper body, for the chest, for the shoulder, for my upper back. But this is static. I'm not moving. So the research is telling us if I do this stretch static, I'm decreasing force production for performance later. So if I do this stretch for 30 seconds and then I go to try to do push-ups, for example, I would be better off doing something dynamic. Dynamic would be like doing a squat and moving my arms like this. So I'm going to perform better in an activity if I do something basically similar to that activity. If I'm warming up my body, if I'm taking my body through the 3 planes of motion, right? Another thing it does is it decreases torque in the stretched limb, but also the unstretched limb. This arm that I just stretched, but also this arm that I didn't. Isn't that weird? That's what the studies show. And the reason that happens is because it's a nervous system response. You know what I mean? So if I stretch here, and I try to go do maybe a bicep curl with both arms, that stretch on that side affects both sides. So it's kind of interesting. That tells us neurological. It's not just muscular. So it's kind of cool.
Force production.
Force production would be performance. So force production would be how much force you can, if you're doing a push-up, how much force you can apply to whatever you're pushing against. Good question. So this was actually shown with a pretty interesting study, and I won't bore you to tears with this. I think it's really fun, but I'm sure not everybody does. But it basically went through that exact process. They had an EMG and an MMG machine, and they found with the neurological testing on the musculature that it actually decreased force production. So that's really important with athletes, especially. If you have somebody that's about to go do a powerlifting event, for example, and they did a static stretch, and then they're going to try to do a big force production movement, that's not going to be very good. So again, it's advanced, but if you work out all the time, try a dynamic warm-up instead of static, because you're actually going to find you get a much better workout. I noticed it the first time I did it, especially with my lower body workout, with my leg workout, because you're looking at the biggest muscle groups in the body. Anybody know what the biggest muscle group in the body is? Any guesses? Glutes. Well, you know. Yeah, it's the glutes. So think about dynamic stretching. Now I'm actually going to show you all a dynamic stretch warm-up here in a little bit, and it's actually quite simple. And if you want to try it, I think you'd enjoy it. This, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail. I think it's interesting. It's called post-activation potentiation, and that's why we call it PAP, because that's a really long name. But the concept here is that doing some sort of muscle force output movement, especially something explosive, can increase your performance in an activity. So again, if you're maybe a basketball player or a tennis player, it actually has been shown if you do some sort of explosive movement before you begin, you're going to perform better. And this was shown in a study with Division I track athletes, high jumpers specifically. And what they did was they actually had them do squats, barbell squats. So they put a barbell on their back and did a traditional squat. So one of these guys. And they did heavy. They did 80 or 90% of their 1 rep max. This is a heavy squat. They did performed, I think it was 3 or 4 repetitions. So if you had to guess, they just did really, really heavy squats, and then they were going to go do the high jump. The high jump's that one that has the straight bar, and they've got to run and jump over it. Would you say they would do better or worse if they just did really heavy squats? What would you guess? Anybody?
Worse.
That's what you would think. But they actually perform better. They perform better because it's a neurological response. Their body had an immediate adaptation to that heavy squat. Your body basically says, oh my gosh, I better get stronger if I'm going to face that again. And now we don't know right away how long that lasts. It could be 10 seconds, it could be 2 hours. One example, I can't remember the name of the NFL player, but he would do a really intense strength workout before every game. And everybody is like, this guy's crazy. Why would you go work out before you're basically going to go do a big workout for 3 hours? And he says, sore body says he felt great. And that could have been this, it could have been that post-action potentiation. So, if nothing else, you have something really cool to say tonight at dinner, right? Post-action potentiation. All right. And so this was, in case you're wondering what EMG was, this was the some of the machinery they used to check that. So part of that study too tells us that hypertrophy, which is basically just gaining muscle, and for ladies, that gaining muscle isn't always gaining mass. Sometimes the way we have you train, we're trying to elongate and tone. So don't be afraid of strength training. Strength training is something that everybody should do. So hypertrophy or gaining muscle and nervous system adaptations equals strength. That's what we kind of saw with the post-action potentiation and the dynamic warm-ups. So it's important to train it that way. So I promise